Melbourne Victory has been playing some football. They had obviously their big headlining friendly match against Wrexham recently, which attracted over 30,000 people to go and watch that one. Finished 3-0 in favour of Wrexham. And Christian, it's already started to bring up a lot of conversations around, well, kind of two things really, is what I've seen. Number one, what's the point of these friendlies? And number two is, why are so many people turning up to these games, but, they're not going to A-League games? So I kind of want to start with that latter point there, because it's a discussion that we're always having, crowd numbers and attendance figures and things like that. It does show that there is, a passion for football in this country. People will go and watch these games. But I think what people are kind of missed, especially with this fixture, is that it's not just, another game of football. It's Wrexham have become this sort of celebrity club in recent years, with the backing through their Hollywood owners, and so they've kind of got this now bigger attraction than just being a football club, right? They're this sort of piece of popular culture which is drawing people in, which is in my mind why so many people turned up to actually watch this game, right? But it does pose a good question of how do we then convert these people, right? And maybe if Victory had have gotten the upper hand on the night and got a result over them, might have gone, oh, maybe we'll check these guys out. But it's that sort of eternal question, and obviously we don't have all the answers, but it's just interesting to see that it's something that's popped up again in this pre-season cycle with these friendlies.
It's fascinating because obviously they attracted, I think, 37,000 just over at this game at Marvel between Victory and Wrexham. Obviously, Wrexham getting the victory in the end, which is not surprising given that they're now promoted in the Championship, one step away from the Premier League. So, I mean, I just saw an interesting stat before. It said that crowd of 37,000 is actually 4,000 more than the highest attendance last season, which was the Sydney Derby. I think it was around 32,500. That struck me as well. Like, what is the answer? Because you try and put your finger on it, and there's just, I don't know, there's different factors that, we always discuss, whether it be the interest dropping off for the last few seasons, not enough marquee players coming into the league, not enough marketing, promotion, TV deal has gone, not the best since the days of Fox Sports. There's just so many things, right, that sort of go into the melting pot. And at the end of the day, the A-League just hasn't been able to attract those casual fans who might, dip their toe in and have a look and say, oh, I might be interested in football, but they just never seem to attract them long-term or consistently, right, to sign up for a membership, to go in, week out, to tell their mates, oh, okay, let's go to a few more games this season. It just seems to be, this missing link. I just don't know the answer to it, but like I said, there's just so many things that can be done differently. It's like a matter for the APL and the FA to sort of sit down and go, like, where are we gone so wrong? How can we just bridge the gap? Because it's not going to be a one season thing, right, where it's going to quickly turn on its head. It's going to be a plan that has to, for a number of years, I don't know what the end goal is, whether it be 5-10 years time that they want to set a specific goal or target, but it's got to start from somewhere, and I just don't know what the answer is.
Yeah. I mean, is it just as simple as we just need to market our clubs better, right? Because that's the one thing that Wrexham have done really well. Obviously, they've had their documentary. It's helped by the fact that they've got these big personalities that now own the club, which kind of, increases that interest a little bit. But the way that they've gone about actually making people feel connected to this team, even on the other side of the world, I think kind of shows how much that kind of stuff has been lacking in the A-League. And yes, okay, we're kind of fighting for paper inches with the AFL and the NRL and all that sort of stuff, and then in summer with the cricket. But it still feels like the clubs themselves can go out and do so much more than they have been doing to actually put themselves out there in the sporting landscape and within the communities and things. And there are a few clubs that do a very good job of that. I mean, Auckland have come in and we've seen them doing an awesome job. The Wanderers arguably have been very good. Adelaide United, I think, as well have done a fantastic job of that. But for the most part, there's a lot of these clubs that it just kind of feels like they just exist and they're just the football club in that city or state or whatever it might be. They're not necessarily going out there and trying to attract the fans. And that's kind of, what I took from this is that, Wrexham have done a fantastic job in doing that, in marketing themselves and putting themselves out there. And I kind of wonder if maybe there's more that the clubs can be doing, whether it's yes, through social media or just through, video content. I mean, people love, a mini series now, right? On like Netflix or a streaming platform, right? So, obviously we've got that deal with Paramount with the APL. The Mariners did one after their treble-winning season last season, called like the biggest little club on earth or something. I think, it's that sort of stuff. I think just these clubs, they need to realize there's opportunities here to market themselves differently, and in ways that they haven't necessarily done before. And I think that, I mean, we're always asking about what more can clubs do. I think that that's one of those ways, right? You've just got to put yourself out there more often. And, if anything, if Victory take anything away from this match, hopefully it's, a few marketing strategies and ideas from some of the Wrexham crew in terms of how to, attract an audience that's, very, very passionate about a team that they might not even have seen play live before.
And you mentioned the Mariners. That's one of the teams that popped up first for me, because we know that there's such a tight-knit community. Like, it's just one of those clubs where it's not hard to, get those fans on board. But at the same time, when the club's not going too well in terms of results, as you saw last season, the crowds tend to drop off. Whereas if you're supporting a club in Europe, whether it be a mid-table team or someone fighting for relegation, you usually see packed out stadiums regardless. And I know there's been the argument that, the A-League it does better than half of the leagues in Europe in terms of crowd attendance, and it's actually not that bad as it seems. So I just think we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to Europe or anywhere else. We should be judging by our own accord, and I just think there's just so much we can be doing. And Melbourne City is another one. They've got, financially, they're set right. They've got so many money that they can pump in terms of resources and facilities, which they've already done in years gone past, to obviously attract the players and coaches, and they've got a great youth setup as well. But I mean, in terms of connecting their club with the fan base, they're another team who has struggled to do that. And an example of that was the grand final week, a couple of months back, where they had, I think, a couple of open training sessions, or they could have been open training sessions, but they decided to make it closed off and just make it players and coaches only, where no one could attend. Like, that's just a small thing. It can be a 1%, but you've got to, those are little things that attract people. Let them come in, let them, sign autographs and let them into that experience. If you close them off, then what does that do to help you grow your club? I think they're little things like that, which each club in the league could be doing. It's difficult, because I feel like we're so far back now, and there's just so many steps forward we need to take. It feels like you're searching and you just can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's there. It's just, you've got to start now. Otherwise it's going to be such a long road back to recover.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the football then, because it was a football game that was played. It's not all just about crowd numbers and people and things like that. And that first part of the question that I asked is what is the point of these friendlies, right? Because by all accounts, it was not exactly a spectacle, right? It was just kind of a run-of-the-mill pre-season show match type friendly, right, between two clubs from different parts of the world. And obviously what we've been seeing, and we're going to talk about a little bit later in the Club World Cup, is at least some sort of competitive reasoning for these clubs to be playing against each other, right? Is that they're fighting for prize money, they're fighting for the Club World Cup, however much teams actually pay towards giving any mind to the actual trophy itself as much as the money that they're going to receive. But there's some reason for them to be playing against each other, right? Whereas with these ones, they just kind of feel like PR and stunt moves, right? And there's kind of two ways that I think about this. Number one is that it's just good to get minutes in the legs this early in pre-season. You just need to do it. And number two is that usually the standard and the quality of the teams that you're going to be facing is significantly higher than what would be available domestically, which would be either other A-League clubs or NPL sides. So I can kind of see the advantages there. But then, the negatives are usually there's no actual competitive spirit to these games, right? It's just kind of a procession. You're just doing your thing. Obviously, it finished 3-0 to Wrexham. The result was never really in doubt. So, it does kind of still beg the question of maybe is there a case for shifting the Australia Cup slightly earlier to get competitive fixtures in earlier? Or are these fixtures, these pre-season friendlies still just part and parcel of the game in Australia, given that there's kind of a lack of other options for clubs to compete in the pre-season?
I think it's more to do with PR, to be honest. And we've seen that, since once we brought in the International Champions Cup, if you remember, like 10 or so years ago, that's when it really started, where all these big clubs came abroad to the MCG to get these packed out stadiums. Melbourne Victory, other clubs, partook in that for a couple of games. And I think it's not really about, I mean, yes, it's great to get minutes into the legs and try and experiment with the squad that early on, because we know the A-League obviously starts a couple of months later compared to the Championship in this instance for Wrexham, which, again, this game meant more to Wrexham than it did Victory for that reason. You've got the Championship, which is edging closer, 5 to 6 weeks away now, compared to Victory, who still have another extra couple of months off to prepare in the off-season, right? So the pressure was on Wrexham to perform here in front of their manager, to get a couple of new faces in, get to experiment. So for them, the win was more important. You can see that especially in the first half. I thought, the intensity wasn't really there from Wrexham as well, albeit they got the goal just before half-time. And then in the second half, you can tell once they made those subs, they sort of took it up a gear. Victory made those changes as well, subbed in the goalkeeper, for Jack Duncan, which had pretty poor showing for those last two goals in the second half. To be fair, that third one especially, I don't know what he was doing. But I mean, all in all, I think for Wrexham, it was more a case of like, this is for a big preparation heading into the season. Whereas for Arthur Dillis and Victory, it was more, yes, let's welcome Wrexham, because as you mentioned before, the PR, I think, is the main beneficiary out of all of this from an Australian football point of view. But I can sort of see both sides to it.
Well, the PR thing's interesting because I said it wasn't exactly a spectacle on the pitch, but off the pitch it kind of was, and it was made a big deal about. And they had somebody dressed up as Deadpool deliver the match ball on the night, and they had Then the controversial thing, right, was the partnership stuff they did with the AFL Wrexham, and again, I mentioned football's always fighting for media attention with other sports, so it kind of feels like a little bit of a stab in the back when these international teams inevitably come down here and do something with an AFL club. It's just like, will that ever end? Please, honestly, like I'm kind of getting to the point where if you want to be involved with football, that's fine, AFL, but if you're going to do that, at least be consistent with it and help out the A-League as well. Don't just leave us in the dust while you're bringing in these international sides and welcoming them and pretending like you care, right?
Yep. Yeah, they always piggybacking, aren't they? You saw the Women's World Cup where they tried to put the games on TV. Originally they weren't, and then they did because the fans, the backlash, we're not going to go to the games unless you put it on. So they did eventually on the big screens. You're right. Like, if you're going to piggyback off, at least do something to contribute to the game, or don't, trash talk, but we can go into the sort of like code wars on another episode, I guess. But it's interesting because, like, the Blackpool thing, for instance, taking the ball out, again, it's these little PR moves that's what you want to try and get out of it, right? For the A-League, which is a fascinating thing. It's not so much the on-field stuff. But then in saying that, to play a side like Wrexham, albeit, promoted to the Championship, but that's still a fairly high level, we know, right? So to have that experience for some of those players at Victory, it's crucial. Obviously, it's not, a Champions Cup where you had the Real Madrids, the Romas, the Manchester Cities coming out. Yes, it's not at that caliber, that high level, but, obviously Victory were taken. They've still got time to plan, still a few more friendlies heading in to the new season, because as I touched on, they've still got a couple of months to go compared to the Championship. So I think that's where the benefit comes in.
Yeah, well, actually, I was going to ask about, sort of the level of competition, right? Because historically, it has been these big name clubs from the top leagues in Europe that have come down here to compete in these preseason friendlies. But Wrexham, they're a Championship club, and kind of to my mind, I think that's about right, because what we've seen in the past when it's been the big clubs that have come down here is they just don't care. I mean, can remember that Newcastle against A-League All-Stars game, right, where it was pretty evident Newcastle just did not care and they just were here to collect a paycheck and go back home. So I think, maybe targeting teams more like Wrexham or some of those Scottish Premiership teams that now have ties to Australia, or, like maybe an Aberdeen or someone like that, or a Celtic. Celtic have been down a few times previously, of course. Play other teams like Portsmouth and stuff like that. I think that's the level of team that they're going to come over here with something still to prove. There's those links to Australia that are strong, so it should bring in a decent crowd, and it's a good level of competition that's a step up for A-League sides, but not to the point where they're kind of just disrespected by the opposition, and it still gives them at least a little bit of a challenge. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on sort of what sort of teams clubs should be looking to bring over for these friendlies.
I completely agree with what you said. I think it comes down to how much of a say does the coaches have in it, right? Do they go to the management and say, the board, and say, like, I want to face this team because it's probably a bit more on our level and we can actually get something more out of it? Whereas you play Newcastle, who, like you said, don't really give a toss about, an All-Stars game. They're there just to collect the money, right? I think that's sort of the interesting factor that comes into play. That's why I said before, it's more of a PR stunt. It depends how much power the clubs have and the APL, the A-League in general, of which clubs come over, because at the end of the day you can bring a Portsmouth or whoever you want to bring, a championship side, but you need to attract the crowd, you need to bring in the numbers, it needs to be a spectacle, right? If you're going to do one of these preseason friendlies, it can't be a stadium that gets half filled. So that's why there's so much temptation to bring in such a high profile club, and that's why the International Champions Cup was so successful, right? Because yes, Victory or other A-League clubs didn't get much out of it in terms of results, but at the same time, friendlies aren't about results. We both know that. It's about getting the best of that experience for the young players as well, experiment, rotation, getting minutes under your belt before the season. That's really what counts, right? So I think that's why, these big organizations tend to lead towards those high profile marquee games, because at the end of the day, it's all about the dollar signs, the money, how many people you can attract into the stands. It's what it comes down to, really.